herself as a rule follower, which means that she treats yellow lights as if they're red lights. She'll only turn right on red as after she has thoroughly searched the area to make sure that there are absolutely verify that there are no turn on red signs hidden somewhere. That's that she's a rule follower. With one exception, though, if she feels that a rule is stupid or pointless or arbitrary, her personality morphs into this devil-may-care lawlessness. And I feel that same temptation myself. In high school, we had a pretty strict dress code, and of course, at that age, what's allowed and not allowed feels puritanical, and so you revolt against it, and just in your little ways, how much you can get away with. And my little window of rebellion was to rebel against the rule that guys had to tuck in their shirts. I still don't tuck in my shirt. Unless your shirt was designed to be untucked, which no one ever knew what that actually meant, you had to tuck it in. And I didn't want to do it. And so I developed the skill of flipping up my shirt whenever I would pass a teacher in the hallway, just to pass by. We hate following stupid rules. On the other hand, though, in other ways, we are instinctive rule followers. Child development specialists argue that giving kids space to play by themselves without adult intervention helps develop this sense of rule conformity. Because what do kids do when they play games? They make rules. They enforce the rules. No tag backs. This is base. You can't shoot me if I'm out of ammunition. The grown-ups aren't making those rules. The kids are. And in fact, there have been a number of times on my own block where I've had to intervene with the kids on the street because instead of playing, all they're doing is arguing about the rules that they have made up. Do you like rules? I ask the question because today in our series on the book of Exodus, we come to the most famous rules in all of the Bible, and maybe the most famous list of rules in human history, the Ten Commandments. But what I want to say about these rules is that instead of being something to worry over, like an overly scrupulous rule follower, or instead of lashing out against it and rejecting it, like tucking in your shirt when you don't want to tuck in your shirt, that these rules are actually about love and freedom. Exodus 20 is where we'll be today, and we'll be looking at the first 4 commandments in verses 1 through 11, and next week we'll finish out the last 6 commandments. But look at these rules. Exodus 20, verses 1 through 11. And God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a carved image, or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the 3rd and 4th generation of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male servant or your female servant, or your livestock, or the sojourner who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So here's what I want to say about all that. Love the one who makes you free. Obeying these rules is about love, and the one you love and obey is the one who made you free. You love the one who makes you free. First of all, love him because he freed you. Love the one who makes you free, and love him for that reason, because he has freed you. where we are in the story. Moses has gone up and down the mountain several times. God has the people have heard the thunder. They've seen the fire and the lightning. Now Moses has come back down, and God here speaks to all the people, and he gives them these 10 commandments. Really, these 10 words be a better way. This is the language that the passage uses. The 10 words. These 10 rules, and it seems that they were written on two stone tablets. And the traditional way of looking at these two tablets is that the first tablet corresponds, the two tablets correspond to what Jesus says is the greatest commandment. To love the Lord with God with all your heart, your soul, your mind, your strength, that's one, and love your neighbor as yourself. So the first tablet, the first four, have this vertical orientation of how do you love God? You love him in these ways. And the next six, and the second tablet is, well, how do you love your neighbor? And we'll look at those next week. It's a bit oversimplifying things. It's not exclusively vertical. It's not exclusively horizontal. But that's a general framework. These are the two tablets looking up and looking out. But notice, though, that the 10 Commandments don't start with commandments. They start this way, with who God is. Verse 2 again. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of slavery, the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. In other words, you once belonged. He's brought you out of the house of slavery. You once belonged to masters who forced you to obey, but now you have a new master. You once belonged to a house of slavery, but now you belong to a house of freedom. Where I'm from, during my middle school years or high school years, there were culture wars about putting the 10 Commandments in public courtrooms, and state courtrooms, county courtrooms, and so forth. The argument was, well, this is what America is. These America's a Christian nation. These 10 laws are the foundations for all of our national laws. The problem that, though, is what it says here. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. These 10 Commandments are not the framework for America's legal system that must be preserved against godless secularism, but they're the framework for how God's own people live before him. That's why it says, I am the Lord your God. The word in the Hebrew, it's singular. It's like God is speaking to people individually. I am your God. I'm not this deity out there who's abstract and distant, who's kind of giving you these rules and regulations that you have to do, and it's kind of coming down from on high. I am extremely close and personal to you, and I've redeemed you. I've rescued you. Which means that obedience to these rules, these commandments, in this framework, isn't following rules so that you don't get into trouble, but it's about the ways that you live in this new life of freedom. You know Kreacher the house elf from the Harry Potter series? House elves in the Harry Potter world, they're slaves. They're owned by wizards. They have no freedom. They have to do whatever their master says. And Kreacher's original masters were bigoted, pure-blood wizards, and they've kind of poisoned Kreacher in this pure-blood ideology. And then Kreacher's master, the ownership, passed on to Sirius Black, he's not bigoted like his family was, but he treats Kreacher with cruelty and rage because of what Kreacher represents to him as his family whom he's rejected. But he can't free Kreacher because he would betray him to the enemy. But so here's Kreacher, a slave, and mutual resentment between Sirius and Kreacher. And under Sirius's his cruel authority, well, what kind of service does Kreacher give? It's half-hearted. It's bitter. It conspires against him. It's mumbling under his breath how much he hates him. But then later, when Sirius dies and Kreacher's, he passes on to Harry as his master, what happens then? Harry treats him with kindness. He acknowledges Kreacher's pain. And then when he does that, what kind of service does Kreacher give Harry? It's enthusiastic. It's diligent. He cooks great meals. He takes great care of the house. And at the very end, he leads other house elves into battle against the enemy in the name of his master Harry, whom he calls a defender of house elves. When Creature is owned by a cruel master, he hates it. He doesn't serve well. But when he comes into a free service, a good, loving service, it's totally different. If you think of God as just another meaningless or cruel authority over your life, then you'll either obey him in terror of punishment or as a way to try to win something out of him, to try to do a deal with him and get something out of him. But if you see him as the one who's given you true freedom in the gospel, who's brought you out of the house of slavery, not in Egypt, but to the slavery of idolatry, the slavery of the guilt of your sin, the slavery over from spiritual powers who are real, who controlled you, who owned you. If you see him as one who's brought you out of slavery into true freedom, then you'll serve and obey him because you love him. You love him because he freed you. So how do you love him? Well, what does obedience look like here? You love him in the first tablet of the law, in your worship, your words, and your work. So you love him in your worship. Here's the first commandment again, verse 3. You shall have no other gods before me. Several of the ways, one of the first of several ways that Israel was unique, completely unique from all the other countries around them, was that instead of having all these different gods with, all the gods have different jobs, and your own family might have your own kind of personal household family gods that you were most, personally attached to. You might do your due diligence with all of them, and you have your favorites. Instead of having that kind of arrangement, here's Israel that says there is only one that you can worship, only one. It's utterly unique, and there's a reason that this comes first. You had no other gods before me. That comes first. Why? Martin Luther said that if you break any of the other commandments, any of 2 through 9, if you break any of those, the reason that you have done so is because you have already broken the first commandment in your heart. In other words, if you break the commandment not to steal and you steal something, the reason you've stolen something, the reason you've broken that commandment is because in your heart, you've already put something ahead of God. You have already... Materialism was already your god, or pleasure, whatever the thing that you stole was, whatever that represented, that thing had become your god. You've already broken the first commandment. That's why it's first. Anything that you've done after this, it's because you've worshipped a false god already. Anything that you love and serve more than anything else, anything that you can't live without, anything that if it was taken from you and from your life, it would cease to make your life have meaning and purpose and happiness and peace. Whatever that is, that's your God. That is the God that is before anything else in your heart. You can even make another person your God. The Flaming Lips indie rock band has a song called My Religion Is You. Here's how it goes. Yeah, Buddha's cool, and you're no fool. To believe anything you need to believe in. If Hare Krishna, maybe it's the thing for you. Hey, that's cool. Here's the chorus though. I don't need no religion. You're all I need. You're the thing I believe in. Nothing else is true. My religion is you. Even a person, anything else that is first place in your heart, that is your God. And the first commandment here, the first way to love the one who's rescued you is you shall have no other gods before me. The second commandment is similar to the first. Verse 4, you shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that's anywhere, heaven, earth, the water. You shouldn't bow down to them or serve them. And here's why. For I am the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation, to those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. Now, this is a second way how Israel is completely unique. That to have an idol, a physical image of the God you worshipped, that was universal. That was universal standard practice for every other culture. That the way they thought about that is it's not that this statue thing is their God, but that in some way their God is in the statue in a special way. But here, notice it's not just don't have idols or images of other gods, but don't have idols, images of anything that you might worship, even the Lord. Why? It comes with a warning and a promise. Now, don't think of this warning as, okay, my great-grandfather, 3-4 generations back, he was an idol worshiper, which means that one day God's going to kill me in retaliation. No, it's not the point. It's that the part of the point is that when a people persist in this idolatry, which is a rejection of the God who rescued them, that his patience is not going to last forever. But for those who love him and obey him in faithfulness, his grace and mercy will never end. John Lynn, a pastor, said that if the first commandment says don't worship false gods, the second commandment says don't worship, including the true God, falsely. So don't worship false gods and don't worship the true God falsely in these images. Think about it. When you make an image, an idol, a physical thing to look at and to hold, what do? You reduce it. He's reduced. You mold it into a shape that fits your own sensibilities, your own desires, a shape that fits your culture's sensibilities. Just think about paintings of Jesus. What do they look like? Paintings of Jesus almost always look like a blonde-haired white man, which is the dominant culture of the people who produce that artwork. But Jesus wasn't a blonde-haired white man. He was and is, in his resurrected body, a brown-skinned Middle Eastern man. But those images can become idols, because who Jesus is can start to look a whole lot like me and my culture, which when it does that, it stops requiring much of me or my culture. But the true God can't be contained in images. He won't be co-opted for cultural power. He's your rescuer who's given you freedom, not a tool to give you what you want. So don't worship false gods, and you don't worship the true God falsely. You love him in your worship. Next, though, you love him in your words. You love him in your worship and love him in your words. So the third commandment in verse 7 says this: you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. Now, if the second commandment was about having wrong visual representations of God, the third commandment is about the wrong verbal representations of God. God's name. So don't take the name of the Lord your God in vain. The name of God in Exodus is very important. He reveals himself to Moses in the burning bush. He reveals his name. I am who I am. His name is bound up with who he is. He is the I am. His name isn't like American names, which don't usually mean anything, but his name says who he is. So to not take his name in vain means to not speak about him, whether through your actual words or even through your actions, your life, but to not speak about him, not to speak falsely about who he is. One pastor says that it's not just about particular words which are forbidden, which are taboo, but through your words and your lifestyle, you have to honor and respect who he is. Think about it this way. Imagine that in private, I'm the best husband in the world. My wife has to imagine, it requires more imagination than the rest of you have this. But imagine that I'm the best husband in the world in private. I'm consistently affectionate. I happily share in all domestic duties. I tell her how wonderful and beautiful she is all the time. I listen to everything she says with enthusiasm and compassion. I'm the best husband that's possible in private. But then in public, when I'm with my friends, I complain about her. I can't believe, you wouldn't believe that she made the red salsa last night when she knows that I prefer the green salsa. She does that all the time. She doesn't care. And I complain about her, and I mock her. And then my public actions go the same way as my words. I visit the kinds of businesses that cater to men's appetites. I have inappropriate interactions with female colleagues. If I did all those things in public, it doesn't really matter what kind of husband I am in private, does it? That I'm not actually the best husband in the world. I'm closer to the worst husband in the world. You see, there's a line between how you love and serve something and how you speak about it. So you love most of all the one who set you free, and you love him in your words, the words of your mouth, the words of your life. Lastly, love him in your work. So you love him in your worship, you love him in your words, and you love him in your work. How do you love him in your work? By one day, for a certain amount of time, not doing any of it. Here's the fourth commandment, verses 8 through 11. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male servant, your female servant, your livestock, or the sojourner who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Look at what's forbidden here. You can't work on the seventh day of the week, and you can't force anyone in your household, including your animals, to work for you on that day. Which means that you're saying no to profit on that day's work. So it's not that you can take the day off, but things are still happening on your farm. No, you have to take the day off, and you are saying no to bringing in the money. You can't force your slaves, for instance, to go out there and get their hands dirty for you. You can't do that. Why? The reason why is not because this rest, this Sabbath rest, is psychologically good for you, which it is, but the reason why it gives us is because God rested. 7 days creation, 6 days he worked, the seventh day he rested, which means that the whole creation is oriented towards the day of rest, towards a final Sabbath rest. And that's why God has set apart that day, that Sabbath day, as a holy day that belongs to him. Now, Christians disagree about how much this Sabbath command still applies to us as Christians. In the New Testament, we see the church very quickly no longer setting aside worship on the seventh day and instead gathering for public worship on the first day, on Sunday. And probably the reason why they did that is because Sunday is the day of resurrection. Now, my own view is that the Sabbath command, as it's stated here, is no longer enforced in exactly the same way. Why? Because Jesus has fulfilled the Sabbath. The command here to keep the Sabbath day holy, that Jesus, in a way that we could never do, has fulfilled that. Hebrews says that this Sabbath rest, it wasn't just about this one day, but it's a place they're going to. It's a place of final rest, of final peace, of final enjoyment in God's presence and in communion with him. And Hebrews says that Sabbath rest was something that the Israelites never got to experience because of their rebellion. That Moses didn't give them this rest. Joshua, their next leader, didn't give them this rest. Only Jesus does. And Hebrews 4 says, "So then, there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For whoever has entered God's rest has also rested from his own works as God did from his. There remains that rest. It's an invitation to come and rest. And the way you enter that rest is by trusting in Jesus. In other words, Jesus is your rest because he did all of these things which you didn't. Do you always love the Lord your God first? Do you always worship him truly? Do you speak of him with your words in your life perfectly? No. But Jesus did. And he becomes our rest for you. Now, does that mean that you can do whatever you want with any day of the week? No, I think you still love him in your work because your work and your worship are so tightly connected. Derek Thompson says that the decline of traditional faith in America has coincided with an explosion of new atheisms. Some people worship beauty, some people worship political identities, and others worship their children. But everybody worships something, and what he calls workism is among the most potent of the new religions competing for congregants. What's workism? He says, it's the belief that work is not only necessary to economic production, but it's also the centerpiece of one's identity and life's purpose. And the belief that any human policy to promote human welfare must always encourage more work. In other words, I'll only have rest. I'll only have happiness. I'll only have security by giving my life and my soul to this work. But what your rescuer says to you is that you only find that kind of rest in me. So you love him in your work by taking this time not to do it and give it instead to being with God's people here for worship and hearing his word. Because when you do, you're saying, my work doesn't save me. I don't have to live as if my work saves me. I'm not my own rescuer. I'm not my own provider. Jesus is. David Wright, one of our elders who's in Washington State with Best Family, he said to me on Easter something like that what he loves about Easter for the entire day is this blissful feeling of rest. That Jesus is risen from the dead, so there's nothing to do. On the one hand, there's everything to do. There's people to love. There are refugees to care for. There's justice to be done. There's mercy to be shown. There's everything to do because everything matters now that Jesus is alive and risen. But on the other hand, there's nothing to do. There's nothing to earn because everything has already been done. Jesus has done it. Jesus has obeyed and worked and brought us into his rest, which we don't just get to enjoy once a week, but at every moment in the gospel. So we love him in our work by, in some way, within the frameworks of our own particular callings, by saying, my work is good, but it's not a God. My ultimate purpose on this earth is not to work, but it's to rest in the one who worked on my behalf. So you love him in your worship. You love him in your words. You love him in your work. You love him in all these ways. You love the one who made you free. I read a foster family story. A child, maybe middle school age, a boy came into their home. And just for a moment, just think for a moment, what kind of pain and loss and trauma would have preceded that moment for a child to be removed from his parents' custody and go into a stranger's house. Just think about what's happened before this point. So here's a boy who's been through who knows what hell to get here, and he comes into their house, and the first words out of his mouth are, "What are the rules?" Because he's been here before. Not this house, but other foster houses. He's gotten shuffled around the system. And wherever he goes, he's learned the game. Wherever you go, there are rules, and it's best just if you just keep your head down and follow the rules. You know, bedtime at a certain time, music not too loud, whatever. But you play the game. You keep your head down. You follow the rules until you get shipped off to somewhere else. So, what are the rules? And this family's heart broke because of course they have rules. But they had so much more than rules. They wanted to love him. They wanted to tell him that he's safe. They tell him that he's going to be okay for the first time and maybe forever. That as long as he is in this house, he is family. And yes, they wanted him to obey the family rules. Why? Because, more importantly, he was now family. And they loved him. And everything God puts before you to obey, he does it because he loves you. They're the family rules because you're in the family. And you're in the family by grace, not by obedience. He's freed you. He's made you his. So in your worship, your words, and your work, obey him. Love him. Love the one who's freed you. Let's pray. Our Heavenly Father, we give you praise and thanks for your Son, Jesus, our Redeemer, our Rescuer, who has rescued us out of the worst slavery, that our lives, our souls were imprisoned, but now we are set free, and it's all by grace. You set us free before you ever gave us one thing to do. Lord, help us to rest in your freedom. Help us to rest in the goodness of belonging to you as our good master, our Father. Lord, help us. Our hearts are inclined in so many directions to be. Our hearts are idol-making factories. We constantly find things to look to for happiness and significance and peace. But Lord, only you give us these things. So help us to put no other false god in our hearts before you. Help us not to worship you falsely and co-opt you into who is convenient for us, for you to be. Help us in the way we speak of you verbally in our lives to be consistent and to honor you for your goodness and your grace. And help us even in our own work as we wrestle through all the demands on our time. Help us to rest in you, and even in certain ways saying no to the rat race, saying no to these demands so that we can actually be joyful and peaceful with you. And we thank you that Jesus is our rest, that he did all of these things for us in ways that we have failed to do for ourselves. We thank you for him and pray this in Jesus' name.